You're listening to Mountain Heartbeat with Joe and Rosa Hopkins, proclaiming the gospel through word and through song.
Hi, and welcome to Mountain Heartbeat. I'm Joe Hopkins. This week, Rosa continues her interview with Rebecca Bender. Rebecca Bender is a writer and speaker who started the Rebecca Bender Initiative, trying to train law enforcement and others in how to spot the signs of human trafficking and sex abuse and to get women out of these types of situations. And they're going to continue their conversation this week about the warning signs you can look for to find if somebody's being trafficked.
Absolutely. Yes, our culture has descended into a downward spiral with pornography, and it is seen as okay, if you will. People almost see it as like a victimless way to spend your time, that it's personal, I'm only hurting myself, and maybe I'm not even doing that. Sometimes people even advocate for it, but no, there are victims, and you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting people and creating demand for this industry that now, thank God, is coming to light. You mentioned that there are some red flags that you might notice, say, for example, the girl or the boy at the mall, and you'd mentioned that, being with an older person, for example, like the one example at Macy's and buying lots of expensive things. What other things are there that would tip a person off that perhaps this person is here against their will?
Well, again, you're going to want to notice that they're not often by themselves. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an older man lurking within the shadows necessarily, though that absolutely can be the case, and I've seen that often, where a girl is at the mall and she's going from one store to another store, and her trafficker is just kind of standing in the middle and waiting and watching, and people would think, well, why are they doing that? Well, one, they have to keep her somehow, and that is very much like domestic violence, where you see these honeymoon phases, where she's going to get beaten or horrifically gang raped, and then he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'll give you the weekend off and I'll take you shopping. And so what you're potentially seeing out in the public is that honeymoon phase, that he has her on, taking her around to buy things, pretending as if he cares, but he often isn't going to go, into the store with her. The other thing that they see is oftentimes two traffic victims together. So it's not always just the girl and the trafficker, but it could potentially be a buyer who is taking her out, and he's much, much older, or another traffic victim, and one is given an incentive to be the eyes and ears for the other. So the things are going to be hypersexual, pretty skimpy clothing, oftentimes in a hurry. They're not there to hang out and get food and sit in the food court and relax. They're not doing that. They're in and out and they're back home. They have usually only a certain amount of time away from home until they have to be home or they get in trouble, quote unquote, which means beaten. And so they're oftentimes in a hurry. They don't have time to stand around and loiter. And then, again, expensive things, expensive cars. Those are a very big lure for young girls coming out of poverty. And if the trafficker can buy a brand new car and make them feel like they're now buying this false sense of empowerment, it's easier to keep them in compliance without having to physically abuse. So those would be a few things that we say to look for.
And so I would assume that in those cases, too, there are some things that people can do, maybe if they see somebody that they think has been trafficked.
Yeah, we always suggest that you call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 1-888-3737-888. And the things to think about that are important that we like to, prep people for is, now that you've heard about the issue and you know that human trafficking exists, in every state in this country there's been cases of human trafficking, and you can start learning the warning signs. When you're suddenly in the moment and you're in the grocery store line or you're hearing somebody talk and it's about posting an online ad or getting to their call and she's dressed revealing and the boyfriend, it looks like a boyfriend is out in an expensive car telling her to hurry up. And you kind of, honestly, advocates and bystanders, they kind of go into a little bit of panic where they're like, oh my gosh, I think I'm seeing this very thing that I just heard about on the radio. Mm-hmm. And so we suggest jotting it down, on a piece of paper in your purse or on your hand as quickly as you can, because you aren't going to remember it like you think you are. You're not going to remember what she's wearing, about how tall she was, what color hair, what color and make and model was the vehicle, what color was the vehicle, what did the driver look like. Trying to just take down any part of the license plate or at least the state that you could get. Anything that you could jot down on your hand or a piece of paper in your purse, you'd be surprised how much you actually don't remember when you're in that heightened sense of alert or panic. So when you call the National Human Trafficking Hotline to give that information, you want to be able to relay what it is that you saw.
And so with your situation, when you were forced into this, and this now became a way of life, what happened? Did you ever feel that your life was threatened? And they were obviously using your child against you as a vulnerable point. But can you walk us through that a little bit, what that kind of lifestyle is like?
Yeah, I mean, my life was threatened often, and in the nearly 6 years that I was forced into human trafficking, I ended up getting sold and traded between 3 different traffickers. Both men tattooed their names on my back, which is called a branding. It's like a piece of cattle to exhibit ownership. In case you run, it can be returned to your owner, or if you're finally been given a little bit of time where you can be out and about on your own. If another trafficker sees you and he sees your brand, then he could, in a sense, tell on you if you're not what's called obeying like the rules of the game. It's very much like any organized crime. There's a set of rules you have to follow, just like, we've all maybe seen the show of Sopranos. It's very similar where there's these, sets of rules that you have to abide to. And if you don't, then you get in trouble, or if someone sees you, they're able to kind of tell on you. I was also hospitalized for dehydration and overexhaustion. I was given an hour to sleep in the closet oftentimes. I'd be forced to work in a manufacturing plant all day, being labor trafficked, and then I was forced to be sold over and over again at night for sex. Been to jail 7 times. So I had a really extreme 6 years, and I just wanted to die, honestly. I'd sent my daughter to my mom's for a summer once, and it was during that summer that I tried to commit suicide. I had no more hope. I couldn't figure out, how my life got here. I remember feeling like I was a good kid in school. I came from a good home. How did I get here? How did I get to this place where I can't figure out my way out? And even though I was free to go to the grocery store, I'd be given an hour to go to the grocery store and get back. I would be free to take my child to school and come home on my own. But I think people forget that when you're living in that kind of constant beatings, I've been beaten till I was unrecognizable multiple times. I've had my face broken in 5 different places and had to have reconstructive surgery. You don't realize what that does mentally to your psyche. And it's like you live in this tornado, and you just need enough time to, let the dust settle so you can see what roads are out there to make an informed, healthy decision to get out or an escape plan. But when you're living in a tornado, it's like your brain is so foggy you can't figure out how to do it. I did have 4 attempted escapes where I learned what to do better next time or to hide money next time. I learned that I couldn't buy a plane ticket with cash post 9/11 because I ran and got all the way to the airport and I couldn't get on the plane. I realized that the first place I needed to call was the school to put him on a no pickup, because the first time I ran home to get our stuff, he showed up with the baby, checked my daughter out of school and showed up at the house. And so you just start realizing what to do better next time. And then you get beaten and you go through the honeymoon phase and you think it's going to get better, and then it doesn't, and then you try to escape and you live in this cycle. But finally in 2006 or 2007, right around there, the feds raided the home that 2 other women were in. They handed down indictments on one woman and for tax evasion and bank fraud, because our trafficker had her open in a bank account in a fake name so that he could launder money through it. And then within a few months, they surrounded the home that we were in up in Vegas, that another girl was in Vegas, and then I was in a townhouse around the corner. And anyway, the feds came in with a federal indictment and took our trafficker away, which finally allowed me an avenue to escape. He got sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for tax evasion, was the plea deal they gave him. But it gave me 18 months to get out and start over, figure out what I was going to do with my life.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, if you could just tell us what happened from there, because at some point, obviously, Jesus has restored, and there's this verse that I personally love that says, "I will pay back to you all the years that the locusts have eaten." And meaning that God will do in such a short period of time, he will give you back all the things that the locusts have destroyed. And he's obviously done that with you. Would you mind telling our audience what happened to your life after you got away?
Yeah, well, during my 6 years, I had a couple, near-death experiences. I was almost strangled to death by a serial rapist. I barely was able to get out of that room alive. I tried to commit suicide, and it didn't work. I had started to have these little incidents where, even as not a believer at the time, I was having these conversations with other women, like, do you think there's a God? Because something keeps, stepping in every time I try to leave the earth, and just kept having some of those encounters. And finally, actually, when I was finally able to get out, I ended up, praying and going to church. Something that I actually, and it's kind of a long story, so I'm just trying to make the long story short, but halfway through my trafficking, I got saved. And I got filled with the Holy Spirit and delivered from drug addiction. By the first trafficker, I started using drugs heavily because I know their way to cope with what was going on. And I got addicted to drugs by 22. And in 2002, the Lord delivered me from drug addictions, and I got saved and filled with the Holy Spirit. And then I lived another 3 years in trafficking, filled with the Holy Spirit. And I would pray and ask Jesus to, bind the spirit of anger before a beating, or to just help me get out. And finally he did, and I was able to escape after the feds came. And I thought for a while that I was going to have to earn my way back to hearing his voice when I finally got out. And but the Lord doesn't work like that. And the more you seek after him, the more he shows himself faithful, and he meets us right where we're at. And I can just remember feeling like that prodigal son where my dad ran out to meet me, and immediately I could hear his voice again, and immediately I'd read his word and it would just come alive. And I thought, others have died that I might live, and I really wanted to figure out what the purpose was that God kind of kept me around, and when I knew other women that hadn't been so fortunate. And I started just going after Jesus with all my heart, the same amount of, zealousness that I went after other things, and before I got saved, is what I wanted to do with him. And he's so faithful to heal our hearts and our minds when we seek him. He'll do that, and I just love that about him.
Thank you for joining us this week on Mountain Heartbeat. That's all the time we have for today. However, Rosa will continue this interview with Rebecca Bender next week, again on Mountain Heartbeat, same channel, same time that you're listening to it here. If you'd like to hear this and other fine programming, you can find it on soundcloud.com/Rosa Hopkins or on youtube.com/Joe and Rosa Hopkins. You can find Rosa online at gutsychristianity.com, and you can find us online at joeandrosahopkins.com. And I certainly hope you will join us next week for the rest of this interview with Rebecca Bender from the Rebecca Bender Initiative. And thank you very much. We'll be back same channel, same time next week. I believe it's Saturday at 10:45 on WEMM.